Welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today, I'm joined on Zoom by Daniel Raim, co-writer and director of Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen, a look at how Norman Jewison created the stunning 1971 film Fiddler on the Roof, which was based on the musical that opened on Broadway 7 years earlier. Film critic Pauline Kael called Fiddler the most powerful movie musical ever made.
The phone rings. How would you like to be title in the film Fiddler on the Roof? And I put it down and screamed like, ah!
Cut! All right, hold it there.
Arthur Krim looked at me and he says, "What would you say if we were to say, we want you to direct Fiddler on the Roof?" And then I said, "What would you say if I told you I'm a goy?" Taking a play and bringing it out into the real world, it's always a challenge for a director.
Bringing Fiddler to the big screen was certainly one of my great challenges. Jewison is one of the few directors who understood that. He had fantastic sense of rhythm musically.
John Williams managed to harness my singing and almost make the verse that I do with the shawl kind of ballad-like. Matchmaker, matchmaker, I'll bring the veil.
It's not just about a dairyman with 5 marriageable daughters. It's more than that. There's something else that gives these shows their power.
I found it was quite possible for me to identify with Tevye and to identify with the Jewish religion.
Over 1 billion people saw the film, so they couldn't all be Jewish.
Getting to know the actresses who played my sisters brought us close together, which gives you the sense of family.
The girls were my family. They were my sisters.
During the wedding scene, Ross was just following through an instinct to give me a hug.
Even in a musical comedy like Fiddler on the Roof, you still feel the pain. And I think that's, that's the heart of the thing.
We want a film for everybody.
And what is it about the fiddler and the fiddle that we can't let go of? It's the closest thing to a human voice that there is. That's a fiddle. That's worth the price of a ticket.
Daniel is known for his documentary work, having made nearly 30 documentary films, many focusing on cinema masters like Alfred Hitchcock, Buster Keaton, and Francois Truffaut. His 2015 film, Harold and Lillian, a Hollywood love story, not only tells the story of a special husband-wife relationship, but gives us an inside perspective on how movies in Hollywood are made. The film was an official selection of the Cannes Film Festival. Daniel's also had a film nominated for an Oscar. Daniel, welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So I guess the first question is, what draws you to these cinema masters? And in this case, this is a film about, it's really a film about Norman Jewison, as much as it's a film about Fiddler on the Roof. So what is it? I mean, were you a movie lover as a child, or please?
Yeah, thank you. A majority, this is my 4th feature-length doc. And then you referred to my first documentary, which is about Robert Boyle, who's the production designer of Fiddler on the Roof. So in many respects, when I was a student at the American Film Institute and met Robert Boyle, who had designed North by Northwest and The Birds, among other Hitchcock classics, I was drawn to and continue to be drawn to the story of behind-the-scenes artists who are not necessarily in the spotlight, like Robert Boyle, production designers, cinematographers, and humanizing the art form of cinema. And I think that this doc, Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen, is an extension of that, my own curiosity of learning about the creative process and the people behind it, behind the master of great films like Fiddler on the Roof, and what life experiences they had that informed their creative process.
You know, it's interesting. The public sees a film and they'll see a name of a director attached to it, and they'll say, oh, this is a film by. The reality is that not many of us understand that it's such a collaborative process. And what you've done with your work and with this film is you really dig deep. I mean, it's clear that you have, you know, a person at the helm in the name of Norman Jewison, but all of the other creative people, including the actors. Why? I mean, you said you did your first doc on Robert Boyle, but why did you decide to come back? I mean, here you've done films on Ozu and Tarkovsky. I mean, all these great directors, but why come back and do it, in effect, a more extensive film on Fiddler?
A deep dive on the making of Jewison's film. It's a great question. I think it speaks to the power of that film and the effect it had on me when I was 13, when I first saw it at the home of my grandparents. They had the double VHS cassette and popped it into the, you know, VCR, and they said, well, we want to show you this movie. And I don't even think I even realized at that moment to what degree that film sort of captivated me. The music, not just the music and the story, but the production design and the origins of Shalom Aleichem stories. It's set in the shtetl, which was I was drawn to sort of trying to understand what did that world look like? What did the world of my great grandparents? Because as I'm watching the film at the age of 13 for the first time, not aware of the music or the stage play, just seeing this movie transported into this world that began on Broadway, you know, Shalom Aleichem stories, then adapted for Broadway and then adapted for the screen. But to the left of the TV of my grandparents were portraits of my great-grandparents who did not survive the Holocaust, that were killed in Auschwitz. And all of that combined, combined with the experience of finally seeing it on stage in 2009, Topol's farewell tour in Los Angeles, and the audience standing to their feet to sing along with Topol. But I didn't see anyone, you know, let me clarify. The audience was a mixed ethnic backgrounds here in Los Angeles. And with me, transported, not Jewish, right? But transported into this world. And as mesmerized and moved as I was, and I wanted to better understand, what is it about this story and Norman's film that can do that?
You know, it's fascinating that you talk about its origins, and you have the wonderful LA Times film critic Kenneth Turan speak about some of that. Out of all of the classics of Yiddish literature, and you're talking about a treasure chest of literature, somehow these Tevye stories sort of just, that's it. You know, people think of Eastern Europe, they think of Tevye. When you went to interview some of the actors, you know, I mean, this is a film that was made over 50 years ago. So first of all, finding them. Second of all, you know, getting them to reminisce about something that was, you know, many, many years ago. Were they reluctant or were they happy to talk? They seemed to be. Either you drew them out. Can you talk about that process?
Well, the interview process is my preparation, you know, is to learn as much as I can, prepare my notes, my questions, but ultimately it becomes a conversation. And I try to kind of withhold and to let them share their soul, their secrets, whatever they want to convey. And my first interview after seeing Topol's farewell tour was Topol.
On the other hand,
and I was fortunate to have a connection, a family connection to him. A distant aunt of mine went to the BBC School of Television with Topol in the 60s, so they had a relationship, and he invited me to his home in Tel Aviv.
No.
There is no other hand.
And invited me to his studio, his kind of music room, and we sat, and I brought my camera and lav, and it was just me and him in 2009, and boy, you know, he started to go into all sorts of deeply fascinating and moving anecdotes about his journey to become Tevye, not liking Fiddler on the Roof when he first saw it on stage with Zero Mostel, connecting with it later when he saw Shmuel Rodensky, a Russian actor, perform Tevye on stage in Tel Aviv. And then a couple of years later, he had the part in London, and how he drew on memories of his father and all those tensions. So his personal story was resonated with me.
Huddle!
And
Huddle. Have I made a match for you?
In 2021 is when I interviewed the three actresses. I had no idea in the edit to what degree their collective story would really bolster and inform and develop into a unique narrative for this documentary. So it's not just in the interview where I'm developing a story through the interview, but it's in the edit too.
You know, you talk about the three actresses. They were the three daughters in the film.
Yes.
Each one had their own little story. Michelle Marsh talked about the fact that this was probably the greatest experience of her life professionally. Rosalind Harris talked about that she, because of this and because of Barbara Streisand, she felt comfortable enough to do these kinds of things. Did they have careers after Fiddler, or these were sort of one-shot kinds of things?
Not to this extent, nowhere near. They all worked in television, film, commercials, but nothing like this. And they acknowledged that. And I think that's one of the unique, you know, storylines that I understood better making this documentary, that it wasn't a launching pad, Fiddler on the Roof, you know, for the three actresses. Topol had a bit of a career in movies. And then, of course, in theater, he was definitely prominent and continuing the role. Also interesting to note that Rosalind Harris, who plays Seitel, was then Golda at the playing across Topol many years later. So to a degree, her career she had a beautiful arc there. Yeah.
Let's talk about Norman Jewison. You know, it's fascinating. I remember when the film came out, Norman Jewison, he's got to be Jewish. And, you know, and the question of, you know, a Jewish director versus a non-Jewish director dealing with Jewish content material. He seemed to open up, and you have many interviews going back to almost, you know, 1971, it seems.
Correct. Yeah.
First of all, how did you find those interviews? Clearly, you were too young to have shot them yourself. And what did you find was the Norman Jewison of today very different, looking back on a really incredible career?
Yeah.
You think, you know, this young Norman Jewison in 1971?
Yeah, no, I do love, in terms of the experience of making these types of documentaries, there is an aspect of the theme of memory, the theme of a 90-year-old iconic Hollywood director, right? Born in Toronto, raised in Toronto, started in musical television. Looking back, reflecting, remembering. Same with Michelle Marsh and the three actresses. Just, I really love to give breathing room to the edit and so the audience can be with them in those moments. But Norman, to your question, let's start with the first interview that I used, chronologically speaking. In 1970, the National Film Board of Canada sent a crew to the location of Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, Zagreb and Lekenek, where they shot Fiddler, and Pinewood Studios. And we were able to work with the National Film Board of Canada to scan the master prints in 2K resolution so that when we project Fiddler's journey to the big screen in theaters, you can really see in beautiful detail, you transport it onto the set. And then my first interview with Norman was 22 years ago. He was a co-star of The Man on Lincoln's Nose about Robert Boyle. The Man on Lincoln's Nose is the Oscar-nominated documentary about Robert Boyle that you had mentioned, which is a reference to his work with Alfred Hitchcock, which is why Norman was drawn to work with Robert Boyle. They had worked on, I think Send Me No Flowers, then Russians Are Coming, and then the Thomas Crown Affair, and then Gaily, and then Fiddle on the Roof. So they had, and you were talking also about collaboration. Their collaboration, I mean, Bob Boyle cites Norman Jewison after Alfred Hitchcock as one of the great collaborators. And I think this documentary, Fiddler's Journey, in some respects is a portrait of a visionary director who understood how to get elicit the best performances from his actors, how to work with John Williams and Ozzie Morris, the cinematographer, and Robert Boyle, and really kind of bring all these people together to create one unified vision. And then, so in 2022, I interviewed him for The Man on Lincoln's Nose about Robert Boyle, and was able to draw on those interviews and go back into my archive. Many years later, in 2015, Norman published a book, This Terrible Business Has Been Great to Me. It's his autobiography. And in reading that book, my curiosity was, once again, I thought, man, I have to interview Norman. If he can find 2 hours and I can just talk to him just about Fiddler. Let's just go in. And we talked in depth in 2016. Fortunately, we had a cinema quality camera so that when I edited this in 2020, we could, it looked, had the highest 4K resolution. And we spent 2 hours talking about Fiddler on the Roof and how some of the themes of Fiddler on the Roof, like the themes of family, connect to one of his other classic films, Moonstruck, right? And I asked him at the end of the interview to inscribe in his book, and he wrote, "Thank you for a great interview about my favorite film." And what I learned is that Fiddler on the Roof has a special place, not only in Norman's heart. Robert Boyle told me on several occasions that it's the best film, his favorite film that he worked on. John Williams on camera, I didn't know what to expect. Man, just so much. First of all, John Williams is 90 years old, and his ability to recount to the exact detail and remember all these names. And the Blu-ray is going to have an additional 6-minute movie that I shaped called Beyond the Notes with John Williams that I couldn't use in the doc. And all in the actresses and Topol and Sheldon Harnick, right? The lyricist who just turned 98 last week. And I just saw him in New York. It was wonderful. Clearly a very special place. And I think Norman Jewison is the grand conductor of it. And everyone connects the dots back to Norman, and Norman and Boyle connect the dots back to Shalom Aleichem. It's so beautiful to see how this A-list group of department heads who weren't Jewish could draw on their love for Jewish culture. And then Norman goes in depth about his own, experiences as a child, thinking he was Jewish. And so I think that collective experience and Norman's passion and artistry really is what made Fiddler and continues to make Fiddler a timeless classic.
Yeah, there's that great moment where Norman talks about growing up in a part of Toronto where there was one other Jewish boy, and for whatever reason, he thought he was the second Jewish boy, and the kids in the neighborhood thought he was too,
and teased him and bullied him and called him Jewy. So he experienced anti-Semitism at the age of 6. Yeah.
Let's take a break and look at a clip from this wonderful, wonderful film by Daniel.
Bringing Fiddler to the big screen was certainly one of my great challenges, and also Norman's. In early discussions about what to do for the credits of the film, the beginning of the film, for which there was no music from the Broadway show. We had to create some music based on Bach and Harnick's score. And Norman and I said, who is the greatest fiddler? At that time in the world, we would only say it would be Isaac Stern.
The Mirage company said, you can't hire Isaac Stern. It's going to cost too much money. And I said, what are you talking about? He's the best violinist in the world, and he's a Russian Jew. I'm telling you, it'll mean something to him. So I flew to Chicago, where he was appearing with the Chicago Symphony. And I said, I want you to be the Fiddler on the Roof. He says, I can't climb up on the roof. I said, no, you don't have to play it. I said, I will get an actor to play it. I'll get a musician, a violinist, and he will sync with your recording. But I want your sound. I want your talent. I want your love. I want your devotion to this. So I got back on the plane. I flew to Los Angeles, and I was so excited. I called John Williams, and I said, I met with Isaac Stern. I think he's going to do it.
Daniel, you talked about the collaborative experience and the fact that Norman was the kind of guy who was the master conductor, as you described it, working with these people. And here you have a John Williams, and I'm not sure everyone recognizes that name. I mean, John Williams, many people today associate him with Spielberg because of the number of films that he did, including Schindler's List with Spielberg. But the master conductor, I saw him at Tanglewood last year when they honored him, I guess, for his 90th birthday. And John Williams is in love with Norman Jewison.
Yeah.
And he talks about the fact that they were able to bounce off of each other so magnificently. So here was this great creative musical genius, as Williams is, working with another cinematic genius. And what's nice about the film is that you find John Williams, again, like you do with Normison, at different points in his career. I mean, Williams made this film, 50 some odd years ago?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that special relationship? You talked about Boyle. I mean, Norman is not, and I think if I'm not mistaken, at one point Williams said Norman was the perfect person to make a musical because he understood music. Yeah.
They had actually worked together in CBS late in the late 50s, I believe. I might be mistaken about that, on a CBS live television program. And John Williams, this was his first Academy Award. He was, in 1977, so 6 years later, he scored Star Wars, right? Which is the soundtrack for one of the great all-time soundtracks. And for the making of the film, Fiddler on the Roof, beautifully adapting Jerry Bach's score from the Broadway production, they knew they needed to write an original music for the opening credits, which is known as the cadenza. It's a 7-minute piece of music, and
which was not in the original.
It was not. It was not, and that's partly I'm guessing why he won the Academy Award. I mean, it's this strikingly beautiful piece of original music written and composed by John Williams, performed by Isaac Stern. What John and Norman were able to elicit from Isaac Stern, and just the fact they were able to get him in his busy schedule at that time, I think is quite extraordinary. But and one of the treats for me in interviewing John Williams, and for hopefully the audience, is learning he is in our documentary talking about the creative process, the collaborative creative process of how he worked on Fiddler to make a musical. and really the A to Z, working with the director, the choreographer, the production designer, the actors, and how everything worked together. The one analysis was the If I Were a Rich Man scene, right, that takes place in Tevye's barn, and the ladder he has to go up, and how many beats it takes to get up the ladder, and do they need to remove one of the pieces? And what I thought, okay, John Williams is known for not necessarily revisiting his work. So I'm going to bring on an iPad, or I'm going to show him a clip of that scene and let him talk to it directly. And oh gosh, that was such a great moment in the movie too, where he responds to that and articulates so beautifully how they did that. It was a master class. It was just absolutely amazing to watch them. And people don't understand what a production designer does, what a cinematographer does, and what's the difference between a cinematographer and a director. So one of the things I came out of with after having watched the film was that you so beautifully gave us an understanding of the cinematic process, let alone this wonderful film. To see the fiddler, to see the greatest fiddler of the time, Isaac Stern, and how he was brought into the process, and the other individuals who, how do you take something adapted from Broadway and make it into a movie? So when you make a movie, you clearly are not on a stage. And one of the things you did was you showed us how the film was made. Why Yugoslavia? You actually explained it a little bit in the film, but what about Yugoslavia? And can you just talk again? I want people to see the film, but just talk about that one instance where, they're doing the wedding scene and they just couldn't shoot it in Yugoslavia. And then what happened? That's a great question. Tradition. Yeah. I mean, I think the intention, Robert Boyle built the town of Anatevka in Lekenek, Yugoslavia, which was a little village town, using peasants and real wood, and they recreated turn of the century Jewish shtetl. And the intention was to film the outdoor the wedding scene with the bottle dance, but apparently it was too slippery. So the dancers came to Norm and said, we need a safer place to do this scene. And so he recreated, as they do in Hollywood, the same set inside of Pinewood Studios. And gosh, it reminds me a little side anecdote. Henry Bumstead, who designed Vertigo, had this great location for Hitchcock in San Francisco to shoot a scene. And Hitchcock rolls down the window and says, nah, I want you to recreate this in a Hollywood soundstage. So he had to rebuild to a T that exact, corner of San Francisco in a stage. But that's amazing. I mean, that's really, truly, but of course they had so much more control. And I also learned that the Pinewood Studios, the roof could, in London, that the roof can open to allow natural light in as well. So that's kind of amazing. In the film, you intimate that Jewison was going through a little bit of a personal psychological crisis. Yeah. What was going on, and why did why did he use Fiddler as his own therapy? Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. This is a director, Norman Jewison's a director who's has made a series of films that have been politically and socially conscious. And he's someone who cares deeply about civil rights, human rights, and became very close friends with Bobby Kennedy. They met just as he was making In the Heat of the Night. Norman, I love the fact that you included that great shot of the slap. Yeah. Yes. The original slap heard around the world. Yes. So when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, Norman talks about, in my interview with him in his book, about feeling totally lost, and that most painful of sentences for me to read was that I lost the joy. I was afraid I was going to lose that joy in directing. And I told my wife, we need to get out of Los Angeles or out of America. And that's what I needed to make Fiddler. Then what happens is he goes to Israel for research purposes with Boyle and John Williams. And I think the experience of researching in Israel, in Jerusalem, in kibbutzim, and with survivors of pogroms and the Holocaust, and just delving deep into Shalom Aleichem and the roots of Yiddish culture and art, and revived his soul to a degree. I think making Fiddler, because he asked that question, where do I belong? When he, at the age of 6, was told, you don't belong in the synagogue, even though your name is Jewison, and he wanted to be part of that world. I think that for him was really precious. And I think it speaks volumes, not just about Norman Jewison, but just about that how any artist can connect culturally to other ways of being and thinking.
Just wonderful. The film is a film that is a must for anyone who loves Fiddler on the Roof. And Daniel, the film's title is Fiddler?
Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen. Yeah.
That's the film that you must go out and see, and it's going to be playing all across the country. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me, and really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you very much. I hope people get a chance to see Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen on the big screen. I'm excited. It's opening this weekend in Los Angeles, and it's currently playing in New York. And we have other play dates across the country, and you can learn more about our play dates and cities at zeitgeistfilms.com. Thank you.
And the film has actually won the jury award at Jewish Film Festival. So it's going to be playing at film festivals all across the country in addition to the theaters. 100%. And Daniel is correct. I mean, if when you see this on a big screen, it's just something spectacular. So try and get out there. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.